If you've got a welder and you got friends and you're into cars at all, this is a job you're gonna get called in on at some point in time. Let's unload this stuff. Check this out. These are axles for a Jeep, and a guy is swapping them into a Jeep they don't belong in. And that is one of the oldest tricks in the book. Upgrade your axles, right? Well, every time you do an axle upgrade and they don't just go right in, it's not a bolt-in, you get a whole bunch of welding to do to make it happen. So on this episode of the Dirthead Shed, I'm gonna show you what it takes to do all the welding on a set of new axles. This is actually a set of axles for a Jeep Gladiator, but they're going into a Jeep JL Sport. So I've got a guy that I work with that's always building stuff, and he asked if I could weld these things up on the side. So it's time to get these things out of the truck and onto the welding table, and we'll go through the whole process of welding up all these brackets so that they're good to go. This is gonna be a pretty fun one. How will we get these things out? Let's see if we can get this thing up high enough to get it onto that table. Let's try not to launch the Jeep onto the old Dodge. It's working pretty good so far. I think that's as high as we're gonna get the axle. The hood of the Jeep is up there smashing into the safety lever on the lift, so we gotta try and ratchet these things up a little bit more so that we can get that table underneath them. Let's move the D50 out from under it. Oh boy. We'll roll this old table under it. Oh, just barely. Kidding me? This is perfect. Perfect. Let's get some jack stands under that thing. All right, I'm gonna do the same for the other axle. We'll try and get both of them on the bench at once. That way my truck's not out of commission with an axle sitting in the bed of it. It's Wednesday after work and I'm back in the shop. I got these put onto the bench last night before I had to go inside, and now it's time to start figuring out what we're actually doing. Basically what we've got is a set of Jeep axles that have a bunch of aftermarket parts tacked in place. That's pretty common to get somebody that'll like be able to get things tacked and located but not feel comfortable welding the whole thing. So I think what we'll do is we'll start with the easiest part and kind of get warmed up there. I think the easiest part is going to be this Artec knuckle gusset that is on this front axle. We'll crank it up to work with 3/16 material, so right around 150 amps, and see where we end up with. See how things are looking over here on this knuckle at that. This is 3/16 plate, and we're going to cast steel. So I should probably actually crank that up a little more, and I'm gonna maybe preheat this a little bit just so that the machine isn't having to do all the preheating work. All right, I'm gonna warm this thing up and not worrying about getting it bright red or nothing, but I'll probably double check it and make sure it's 250, 300 degrees, somewhere around there before we start welding. This is gonna get a new set of ball joints installed, so I'm not too worried about if these things get hot or not. It is good for them to be in place though while you're welding, just because the ear that they're mounted to is less likely to get to distort if it has something inside of it. holding its shape, you know what I mean? All right, the knuckles all warmed up. I got my welder set up. I've got some of that super missile rod. This is that stainless steel type of rod that actually works good for these dissimilar metals. It really flows in nice when you're doing this cast steel to steel plate. We'll get this one welded all the way up this side to match the other side, and then we'll kind of finish this plate off with the MIG welder, and that's going to be over to that spring perch and stuff. All right, so again, we've got this machine set pretty high. It's actually set for 1/4 inch material, which is like 160 amps, which is a lot of dang power for DC TIG welding, and it is just ripping up this cast. I mean, it's just got a ton of power. It's working really good. Kind of important to keep your heat on the cast part and let that kind of determine how hot you're getting things, because this 3/16 plate is, you can just blow that stuff away at this 150 amps or 160 amps. All right, we're gonna break out the MIG welder now. All right, so I'm gonna come in here and I've got to weld this like pretty deep V in here. I'm gonna try and do it without burning my hand on hot metal, and I'm gonna try and do it without having to build up a big ugly weld in there. Let's see what we can come up with. It's kind of a funky spot, but it's turning out really nice. Gonna finish this corner off. Skip over that. This thing's turning out pretty good. The TIG weld up along the brace to the steering knuckle looks good, and then that little weld like in that deep valley actually turned out really cool. Now we're gonna go over here and weld the axle tube to the center chunk. That's basically, it's sort of preventative maintenance. These Dana axles are actually press fit really tight, and then they have multiple plug welds that hold them in, and they're pretty good. I don't typically see a Dana axle have problems with the center chunk slipping in the on the tube, but in Sterling axles and like the Chrysler whatever 9 1/4 or whatever is in the front of like Ram trucks, I've seen problems with those. So I just figure since I'm in here, the customer wants it done, I'm gonna go ahead and weld that up. So let me grab my that super missile rod and get the camera set up, and we'll see if we can knock this thing out pretty quick. I'm gonna go ahead and start down here and we'll work up towards the top. Ground is close by. This first pass is just to get a decent amount of filler material in there. The second pass will be cleaning it up. And again, this rod that I'm using is Harris Super Missile Rod, 16th inch or 3/32, I forget. And it's designed as a stainless like hybrid rod. Man, my hand's getting hot. It's a stainless like hybrid rod, which is designed for welding dissimilar metals together. It does a pretty good job on this kind of stuff. That was wild. Apparently the ground wasn't good enough. This one's kind of ugly, but we're getting it. There we go, I made it all the way around. Cool. All right, I'm gonna wire brush this. I'm gonna sharpen my tungsten, and then we'll come back and do a second pass just to kind of clean it and even it up. Heck yeah. These are fun projects. Yeah, there's a couple spots I missed, but I'll pick all that back up on the second pass and give you a little heads up on how I sharpen the tungsten. I go ahead and put it in a cordless drill, and then I'll spin the drill in one direction, and then I'll sharpen against a grinding wheel. In this case, it's actually just a flap disc. That's good enough for me. This is a pretty good spot to get at these couple that I missed a spot or two on. Right there. And there. I think we can call this front axle done. The knuckle gussets are welded on and in place. The tubes are welded up 100% on this side and about 70% on this side because I wasn't able to get all the way around the bottom side where that bracket is. But that was a pretty good little project for an afternoon. I'm going to figure out how to get this thing into the bed of my little Dodge, and then that'll give me a little bit more space to work on this one. I'm going to drop the front axle back off at work tomorrow. See if I can get it in the bed of the truck without hurting myself. All right, sweet. All right, it's Friday morning. It's like 6 o'clock, and I need to bust out the welding on this thing pretty quick. This is the harder of the two axles because it has so many like random brackets on it. So this is going to be a mix of MIG welding and TIG welding. It's actually mostly going to be MIG welding on this one. So let's dig in and figure this one out, because if you like do this wrong, it'll just be junk at the end. If I do it wrong, it'll be junk at the end. I don't know. You guys are probably better at this than me. All right, that front axle was just sort of the warm-up. The rear axle is where all the work is. We have brackets from rock crawler suspension for the lower links and the shocks to do. We've got some bump stop pads that are sort of a hodgepodge of different ones. We've got a coil spring mount pad, a track bar from I don't know where. Just a lot of stuff. Luckily, my buddy did clean this thing up and get the brackets tacked in location, so I'm really just the welding guy, which that's always a good job when you don't have to do all the hard work. And then we've also got this truss that's from Artec Industries, and it is made for a Gladiator, which is kind of cool. You can see it's got the holes here in the flat part, and those actually use these cast bosses to help strengthen everything. So we'll start by doing these brackets on the axle, and then we'll finish this job up by getting this truss in. That's really where all the work's at. Let's start by doing some MIG welding. MIG, steel, 25% CO2. We're set up for 1/8 inch 030 wire. All right. Let's see if we can figure out how to MIG weld today. One of the tricks when you're working on an axle is make sure you're always grounded close to what you're welding to. Basically, you don't want to ground over here and then go weld over here. In theory, you could like create an arc that's going through the bearings in like the carrier and like smoke a bearing. I've never seen it happen. I've never even actually heard of it happen, but it's one of those like urban legends that I was told when I first started welding, and I just don't mess with it. So if I'm welding on an axle, I always weld on the side of the axle that I'm grounded to, just so that I don't end up creating some arc that causes another problem. All right, weld number 1 went pretty good. That's a good warm-up. Let's move the ground over to this side, and we'll weld up this outer bracket real quick. Again, I'm not welding this with the welder on like super kill mode. The welder's just set up really for 1/8 inch metal. And I'm running 030 wire. So it's kind of like what you would think of as being like kind of light duty for all these brackets. But we're getting plenty of penetration, and if I'm doing this right, I'm not gonna get a bunch of warping out of the tubes. The goal is to like do as much of this welding as we can, but not end up with a big old bent housing because we threw too much heat at it. This should be a nice clean weld. I mean, it's a fillet weld, about as easy as it gets. But we do have powder coat on all these things. So we'll see if we can get a clean weld all the way across here without the powder coat kind of contaminating things. A little bobble there. Not bad, we're getting it. There's a tack weld on the end that's got a little porosity in it, so we got to kind of cover that. We'll go ahead and wrap around the bottom of this bracket. I think I just ran out of wire. I just put a spool on my other, yep, we're out. When did I buy Lincoln Super Arc? That's the stuff. The Lincoln Super Arc L56. That's the best wire you can get. I'm gonna end up throwing, what do I got? What do I got? I still have a spool of Hobart. Here's what I think of as far as welding wire hierarchy. Lincoln Super Arc L56. This stuff is the best. It's so good. That's always my top pick if I can afford it. It's like very expensive right now. So my second favorite, let's get this brazing rod out of here. My second favorite stuff is the Hobart wire, which Hobart and Miller are the same company. So it's always nice to run Hobart wire in my welder, just cause. And this stuff used to be American made. Let's see, where's it coming from now? This one's in China now. But it's still been a really good quality wire. I just have had problems with some of the really cheap wires in the past, namely what the welder supply is always trying to sell me is this stuff called Washington alloy. And I've had problems with Washington alloy for years, so I really try to avoid it. Everywhere I go, it's like, well, we don't have that, but we have Washington alloy. I'm gonna finish setting up the wire in the machine and we'll get back to welding here in a minute. This thing is dirty. Dirty. You can see there's some porosity in this weld. It just was not working very good for my buddy. So I'm gonna clean that back off of there and we'll start from scratch and see if we can get a good clean weld out of that spot. think that's a good spot to start. I'm gonna throw a little spray WD-40 on everything, and that just kind of keeps the weld splatter down. A little less cleanup work later. All right, here we go. Let's see if we can make this look right. Dig it. That turned out good. We'll go over here and I'll get like about a 1/2 inch of the backside here. And that should just keep that from wanting to crack on that corner. Seems like the radius is off a little bit on the bump stop pad, so they're kind of like too big for this axle. And those misfitments are where you're gonna end up welding. If you're not careful, you're gonna put way too much heat into the axle, and that's where you're gonna get any warping. I know doing the fit up and stuff isn't very fun, but the better the fit, the less this thing will bend and warp as you're welding it. So the spring pad, you can see it doesn't fit very well. There's a pretty big gap over here. It's not that it doesn't fit, it's just sort of the way it had to be formed in order to get the shape right. So I'm gonna weld this up, but I'm gonna focus most of my heat on the pad and then just kind of drop down to the axle and try to keep the heat on the axle to a minimum, really. So I'm just stacking tacks basically, and I'm starting with all my heat up on the pad and just kind of dropping it down to the axle itself. And then once we're past that sort of problem area, then I can run a normal bead. A little more WD to keep the weld splatter from sticking. Now this could have been cleaned better, but we're getting through it. This is a nice little like down in a valley weld right here. This will be strong. There we go. All right, that stuff's all welded. Kind of finished that edge up there. We've got our link bracket welds looking good. Stoked. Might have to take my thumbnail picture for the thing. Check that out. It just doing good today. I'm stoked. That looks great. All right, I guess we'll weld up the other tube, and then once that's up, then we can mess with the old truss and get that going. All right. So this truss is pretty cool. It's all 3/16 plate and dimple dyed, and it actually fits right on here, and it fits pretty dang tight to all of the casting. So what we'll do is bolt it down, snug it up, and then we're gonna go ahead and just weld this whole thing up. I'll MIG weld like this section to the tubes, but like this section up through here is all gonna be TIG welded with that super missile rod. We've got it bolted in the top, so it's pretty secure there. Next, I'm gonna actually weld the parts that go to the tubes. That's gonna be just MIG welded, and we'll knock that out real quick, and then when that's done, then we'll come back and do the TIG welding to the cast. This thing's getting a 3-link conversion, so this is the only upper link that it's gonna have. This will be, rather than being a triangulated setup or something, it's just gonna have one upper and then it's gonna have a track bar. So this one upper has to be really strong because it's doing the job that on most rigs 2 would do. I kind of like the idea of the sort of factory upgrades, using stuff that somebody else might not think is big enough and bad enough, but it really is good stuff. Like these Advantech 44s are pretty dang legit. Let's weld this thing up while we got the MIG welder out. This is where you've probably seen all these TIG welder guys that are using these super giant shielding cups, and that's what I'm using here. This is a Furic Fupa 12. This is a number 12 cup with a gas lens, and the bigger cup on these things basically means you can run the tungsten out farther and be able to like reach in some of these hard to reach places better. And it just gets more gas coverage because of the bigger cup, and the gas lens allows for more stick out and kind of helps with some of these like problematic welding spots like this one. Let's see if I can get this thing to flow in and look right. All right, not perfect, but in there, perfectly in there. Clean that junk out. Let's see if we can get any of the weld down in there, or if that's gonna be just too hard to get with this welder, and I might have to just kind of work it with the MIG welder. Let's see. I'm just gonna have to hit these high spots with this. Not ideal, but I got the tops of these all TIG welded in nice. And I guess I'm gonna see if I can finish the job with the MIG welder by getting down into those valleys there. That's definitely the way to get it done. We are getting the MIG weld to get in there and look really good. So I'm gonna go ahead, you can kind of see it there. I'm gonna go ahead and fill those 3 little voids, and we'll call this side of this thing done. All right, between welded to the tubes, bolted to those studs, and welded through here, that thing is not gonna go anywhere. I said it. All right, we're back on the TIG machine now. I'm gonna go ahead and try and get this upper portion, the hard to reach spots first. I'm sure the camera is probably like freaking out and trying to focus on the welding rod that's waving around in it. Whew, my hand's getting hot. Man, my fingers are on fire. Look at them smoking. Whew. I think I'm gonna call that good. Call it good. The thing's not gonna fall off of there, that's for sure. All right, my last little project on this thing, I think, is just making something that ties from this to that and like makes everything happy together. We'll get this figured out. This should be fine. Basically, I'm gonna cut these back just a little bit so that this plate can slide back to about here. And then once that's all happy, I can notch those. This is gonna be cool. All right, I'm gonna trim these back so that bracket can go back up against it, and then I'll chop the bracket up so that it fits and looks cool. And then I will drill some holes and we'll weld that puppy in. Here we go. This is that bracket all cut and ground and drilled. See if we can get it to bolt on here. All right, that's gonna be pretty cool. Give us a good like weld surface along the back side here. All right, let's get the MIG machine going and blast these little back welds on it. Get a little bit in here. All right, I think we're closing in on the end of this one. I just want to say thanks to all you guys for watching and supporting the channel. I'm gonna have t-shirts dropping here in like a week. I'm hoping to have a merch drop going on July 27th. So keep an eye out on YouTube. I'll make sure to like make another video and a post on it. Also on my social media stuff, check on the Dirthead Shed on Facebook, and then Dirthead Dave on Instagram. So I think that's it for this Dirthead Shed. I'm out of here. I'm going to take a sweet selfie with this contraption, make a thumbnail, and go edit this thing, see if I can get it cranked out today. Thank you guys so much.